there were other times where I was, you know, had the potential to cross. And one of the times I was actually in a procedure room and I didn't recognize my body because I was looking at it. And the doctors were talking about me, but it's like my human mental programming was not allowing me to process that the person that I was looking at was me.
Today, I'd like to welcome Elle to the show. Elle, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Christina.
I have seen you speak on other podcasts, and there are so many parts of your story that are just magical to me and so fascinating. And it's an honor to have you here on the show today. So, how about we get started with, let's just go right into your near-death experience.
Okay. Well, it started when I had an infection and things got worse, and then they got better again. I was treated, got better, and then something happened that shouldn't have happened, and then I got worse again and became septic, had complete organ failure, and was in a coma and put on life support. And that's when I almost died several times. And, one of the times that I can identify, when I was about to leave for good was the part that I remember most. But other times I traveled in and out of my body during my near death experiences and when I was in my coma. And a lot of things I had to kind of validate after I got out of the hospital and after I did recover, and kind of like do my own type of analysis and, trying to understand the whole process because it was so unexpected and it was such a bizarre experience that I didn't really talk much about it at first for a long time because I'm one of those people who just like sits and overthinks and analyzes, and tries to figure things out. And not many people you can talk to about something like this because not many people experience something like this. So that is kind of the summary of my overall journey with all of this. But I'm open to questions about specific things about my near death.
Yeah. Well, first, in your self-reflection or in the moments when you were trying to analyze and figure some of these experiences out, did you ever doubt yourself? Like, did you think, wait, could that have really happened? Or like, did you believe that it happened?
That's a super excellent question. I believe that it happened because of some of the weird things that were just so supernatural and otherworldly. For example, when I got out of when I was I was in a place where they take you off of they wean you off of a ventilator, and I was awake then, and I was being checked on by the doctors and things like that, and my tracheotomy was being removed, and I had a tube in my stomach and that was being removed, and the tracheotomy, when it was removed, literally I think it was about 24 hours and the hole had already closed up, and that was like rapid healing.
Yeah.
So, at that time, I still was fresh in the whole experience. So I wasn't paying too much attention to it other than seeing other people's reactions. Like my doctor had a visible reaction and kind of like, when he went to go check it and saw that it was healing up, kind of pulled back, brought in another doctor, and she was like, yeah, they're not really saying anything to me. And then the same thing with my, I think the tube in my stomach, it took probably like about 3 days to heal,
Mhm.
which is also really fast. And I thought it was, I was kind of like naive to the whole experience because I really believe in drinking bone broth and the healing properties of bone broth. So I kept on asking for bone broth, and they were just kind of commenting how it was it healed so quickly. And I was like, oh, it's the bone broth.
That's so funny. I believe in bone broth too. I have a cupboard full of it just in case.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So they were shocked and they couldn't really
Right.
explain this like
Yeah.
super fast healing that you were
Right.
experiencing.
Exactly. And here I am thinking, oh, it's just because of the bone broth,
Right.
which
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, that helps, but that was a bit fast.
Yeah.
So I was kind of experiencing those things, so I knew something happened. And I like almost right away, even when I would, take naps and wake up and I was half awake and things like that, nurses would go by and they would say, "Oh my gosh, she's sitting up." And I would think to myself, yeah, of course I'm sitting up. And, some of them would say, "Oh, your testimony is so powerful," and I didn't completely understand where they were coming from. But so many people were reacting. I knew something, very significant had happened. And then I started remembering all of these things, and I started realizing that this was a real experience. So I believed it was real the whole time, but I'm also kind of, a science brain as well, even though I'm spiritual. And so I was trying to think, okay, this really happened. But in this particular thing, what caught, I was just kind of dissecting the experience and trying to piece it all together. So I, yeah, but I always thought it was real.
Wow, that's fascinating. So I do want to talk about some of these experiences that you remember,
Okay.
but you did mention that you were spiritual. So that was one of my
Hmm.
biggest curiosities prior to your near-death experience, which I understand was kind of like the timelines are there's not really a linear time
Hmm.
to them. They're
Right.
just kind of
Right.
experiences. And
Exactly.
there's no order. So you were already in a spiritual path, would you
Hmm.
say? Okay.
Yeah. So I already was. And I, at some point, I think, um, at some point in my life, I decided that I, wanted to have a spiritual center, have a God center in my life. And so I kind of went on, a kind of a journey with that. I studied a couple different religions, and then I decided, okay, that I resonated most with Christianity. And then, I was also for a while a part of a pretty fundamental church, even though some of my ideas were not necessarily very fundamental. And so it didn't completely feel like it was everything I resonated with. And then it became very like religious. So there was a lot of religiosity. And so after that, I kind of decided to just kind of go on my own journey again and just, kind of listen to what resonated with me, but I didn't, put a ton of focus on it.
Mhm.
And when I had my near death experience, some of the things that I learned in it kind of confirmed things that I was silently feeling. And then some of the things were, new to me, new concepts to me. So it was like a combination. It was a learning, a spiritual learning in general. But either way, in a way, I'm glad that I learned and solidified my spirituality with what I had with my near death experience, because I feel like I had the luxury of having some proof when, you were kind of shown to or taught to have faith. And I do, but it's also really nice to have some proof of that and to like go to the horse's mouth, and have, a conversation with the divine, and actually get information, regardless of how weird it might sound to, the religious world, to this, other spirituality or whatever. The truth is the truth. So it was refreshing in that sense.
Yeah. I can completely relate. Not that I've had my own near-death experience, because I have not.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I watch near-death experiencers speak about their
Mm-hmm.
experience or read books, there's so much confirmation that I get. There's
Mm-hmm.
validation to the
Mm-hmm.
things that I have resonated with as true. And
Yeah.
so I would love to hear some of those ideas that you got confirmation on, as well as some of the ideas that were presented as new to you. Would you share about those?
Yeah, sure. Things that I got confirmation about was that God doesn't have a particular religion. God is not of any religion. Religion is more of a social construct, and we are spiritual beings, and we're all extensions of God. We're like so imagine God, imagine the sun and God, and whatever you call God, whether that's source or energy or whatever. God is the yellow part. When you're drawing like a elementary school picture of the sun, God is the yellow part. And then, the little rays that we draw down from that, that's us. So we're the extension. And those rays are not only light, but they're frequencies. So we are a frequency of God. And a frequency is the same thing as an expression of God. So in that way, we're kind of like godlets, but we're the more of the emotional and physical expression of the things that God does not express. And God created us out of love in order to also experience self-love for itself, God, by creating us. So there's a connection there. And we are all connected to each other as well in that sense. So that was one of the things that was validated and explained a little bit more. And when you have frequency, everything, frequencies make sounds. And even in space has a sound. When we resonate together, that makes a song, that makes a universal and conscious song. So some of our songs that we make together are good, and they're very appealing, and they cycle up more energy. Some of our songs are bad, depending on the tones that we resonate. But we're very powerful and very we're a force in our own selves because we're an extension of God.
Wow, that's beautiful. And it is things like what you just shared that validate what I believe. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I'm always teaching my clients, well, especially my kids, because there's times in our connections that we're not in harmony, and I'm always trying to have us reach for harmony, and I always say harmony. And now that you said frequencies and sounds and songs, it
Mm.
makes sense why I'm always wanting us to be in harmony rather than
Mm.
not in harmony, because it's a better
Yeah.
song.
Yeah. Even the nature of having children, the reason why God created us in a way that we could also produce offspring, have children, is because it's a metaphor for our relationship with God. Basically, our DNA helps to fuse another life form, our children. And our children are get born. They have free will. They're connected to us because they have our DNA. There's no way they can ever be disconnected because they have our DNA. But they have free will. So they can either do things that resonate with us and we're really happy about, or do things that don't resonate with us. But guess what? They're still connected. We have to love them, and sometimes we, sometimes we, when we're not happy about some of the things that they do, or it affects us, we still have to honor that connection. And they're their own person, and they have their own journey, their own soul, and their own expression. So it's the same thing with us and God. God sometimes does not really like some of the things that we do, and it personally hurts God, like it makes God unhappy or uncomfortable, not in the human sense of that emotion, but in God's sense. But God still gives us free will and still allows us to express ourselves because it's actually an expression of itself, God.
Wow, that's so powerful. And I'm very deep into the works of A Course in Miracles.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that the Course explains it is that, he is the Father, we are the Son, we are
Mm-hmm.
the child. And so
Mm-hmm.
I loved how you painted that picture. Now, I'm curious if there was a specific experience or memory of an experience during your NDE that validated that for you, or was it kind of the overall experience after the fact that you received validation and the awareness and knowledge that that was true?
It was a little bit of both. I had several. So I had three guides, a male guide, a female guide, and one that looked like my daughter. I don't know what species that one was or whatever, because they were not in their true form. They just looked like my daughter. I was told it wasn't really my daughter, but that um, they were keeping me anchored. My daughter, was providing comfort and keeping me anchored and fighting to stay alive. So I was taken through the Akashic records, which that's one of the things that I had a different perception of before my NDE. I thought the Akashic records, and I always imagined it was like a library filled with books and scrolls.
Mhm.
And it was more like a holodeck, like on Star Trek, where you walk into the experience and you learn by touching, tasting, feeling, by experiencing, and you have just absorbed the knowledge through the experiencing. And there aren't that many words, and the guide spoke telepathically and was just like, for example, one of the things that you had mentioned before, merging with the tree. My guide said merge, and there weren't a lot of words, and it was all telepathic, and the guide just said merge, with the tree. And I just, because of your mind expands, at that time I just did that, and then I merged into another life form, like you might have seen before, like I merged into a fish, and then I merged into a lily. And it wasn't like somebody who was pretending to be a lily or moving like how they thought a lily was. And the same thing with the fish. Like I actually became those things. And my mind actually thought like like those things. And I was allowed to experience the thought patterns, the emotions of those things. And my guide told me that everything was conscious. And so after my entire experience, I've continued to get, I don't say downloads, I like to say uploads because it just sounds more up.
Right.
So,
Positive.
right. Yeah. So I've continued to get uploads since then of lots of different things about life and the universe.
Yeah, I'm curious what some of those uploads are, especially about the trees.
Well, one of the things I got about the trees was that in actuality and in reality, that experiments were going to be done on trees because they're conscious, and experiments in trying to extract information from trees because trees live a long life and they know the truth. They know, they've been around the block.
Right.
So they have a lot of information and wisdom. So there were going to be experiments to extract some of that information on a scientific level. And I've said that probably a year or so ago. And recently somebody emailed me and said that they're actually starting to conduct experiments on trees, on the conscious, as to whether or not they're conscious and things like that.
Mm.
So I guess, of course, everything can be abused. So hopefully that won't be abused.
Yeah.
But if we could talk to trees, our lives would be we would be more elevated, as people and as a culture, because they're very wise, they're very caring, they're very forgiving and understanding, and they feel a certain sense of protection for us. So,
That's beautiful. I hope
mhm.
that whoever is doing experiments is gentle with these
Yes,
trees.
yeah. Hmm.
Now, you mentioned the Akashic records, and
Hmm.
I've got some knowledge about the Akashic records.
Hmm.
How would you describe to someone what those were? You described like how it was, but what is it? Like what would the definition be?
Okay. So, the Akashic Records is basically and we always have a tendency to try to take things and flatten it and make it linear when it's multidimensional. So the Akashic Records is a multidimensional thing that exists, which has a record of all events in space, time, and in various dimensions. So, there's a record of things that are happening, like what we're doing right now, that's imprinted into the fabric of the universe, which is part of the Akashic Records. And so that exists. And, my daughter was explaining something. She's studying physics. I mean, she wants to be an astrophysicist. And in physics, everything leaves an imprint. So you and I talking right now, if we move forward in time, there will forever be a record of you and I talking in time. That's kind of like the Akashic records. It's quantum physics, and basically, it shows us also not just our dimension, but you and I talking in another dimension. Our roles could be switched. I could be the host, and you have the NDE, and we're talking. For example. So the Akashic Records is kind of an imprint of all of that quantum information throughout time and space forever.
Wow. I mean, just to imagine what that's like is
Hmm.
hard. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I love how you mentioned quantum physics because I love where spirituality and science are
Hmm.
overlapping.
Exactly.
And I'm curious if it's, is it because like everything is energy and energy never disappears? It just transmutes. I guess that's my best understanding of it.
Yes, that's exactly right. One of the things that I came to understand was that um, energy, there's only one energy source, and then there are branches of that energy source. So every single thing, and that's why everything is conscious, that it's alive, is because we're all connected to that energy source. And in quantum physics, there's not like one energy source over here and then a completely divided and separated energy source over there. It just doesn't make sense. It's all one. And it's the same thing with us. And that's why we're all one. And reincarnation exists for that reason. And the reason why we come back, as long as we're supposed to, and experience different things for our soul journey is because everything recycles the whole pattern. We see all of these patterns in life and we just kind of take it as a daily thing like, oh, I picked up this apple, ate part of it, and then threw it away. And then the garbage man takes it away. And then it goes to the dumpster. And then it gets into the ground. And then, you know, it feeds some worms and then something else grows. And it's like we take for granted all of those things, but those things are all meant to be metaphors to show us the cycle of the universe as well. So the same thing with our life cycle. We are energy source. We eventually, this avatar, this body fades out and it cycles back to a new experience that only in our higher self, that our soul is aware of, that what we need, we come back in a different form, in a different place for whatever is going to help our soul to be more refined and keep refining until the soul is finished. And it's the same pattern that we see with stars, that go from dwarf to adult stars to be sticking around for a long time, having a long life as a star. And then all of a sudden, they explode. And then they, sometimes get sucked into a black hole and they're no more, or they become stardust. And guess what we are? We are stardust. So it creates, it spews off its dust when it explodes, creates other life forms, or is a part of other life forms like ourselves. Everything cycles around everything, and that's the nature of energy. It never dies, it just goes into a different form.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And I can just feel the expansiveness of how our perceptions can
Hmm.
shift and expand by,
Hmm.
really absorbing the
Right.
information, let alone having an experience of seeing it
Hmm.
like you did.
Right.
Like how powerful is that?
In one of my when I went to outer space, I was actually told by my guide that all of the planets, the stars, they're all celestial bodies or celestial beings. They are conscious themselves as well. So that was really fascinating.
Yeah. I'm curious if you have any, like when you went to outer space with your guides, like
Mhm.
what else, what other information or experiences did you remember from that journey?
Well, if I see an orb again anytime soon, I'm going to be staring at it and just trying to communicate with it, I think, because when I went to space, I was an orb. I know what it feels like to be an orb. It's really weird feeling. It's like you look out, you don't have eyes, but you have, you consciously, you have spiritual eyes, like you can see even though you can't touch your eyes, you know?
Mhm.
And then I looked down and I had no body, but I had awareness of a body. Like, you know, I could feel like I had a body, but I didn't have a body because I was a complete orb. And I've seen things, you know, say on TV or whatever show that show people, or, you know, a picture, show people um, that have, or that have seen orbs. And it's just like profound to think that a spirit is in that orb. So it's kind of strange, but that it's actually it's actually a spirit. It's actually a soul in that orb. And so I got to feel what that was like. I also went to another planet. I saw nebula, traveled through, you know, space, saw nebula, went to another planet. I saw another species and just kind of observed them for a while my guide was telling me about the fact that there's intelligent life on other planets, and that some of the intelligent life know about humans. In fact, we're probably the ones that are the least in the know about everything else in the universe. And yeah, so that was interesting.
Wow. I'm just floored with all the information from your story and how beautiful it is. And I do see orbs
Oh,
often.
wow.
I mean, not every day, you know, but I've seen a
Mhm,
few.
mhm,
And so I'm
mhm.
gonna be paying attention next time.
Yeah, maybe try to. Do you know why you see orbs?
Um, I don't. I can't answer that. No.
Mhm. Do you think it's they're visiting you for a particular reason?
I would say maybe once, yeah, there was a specific thing that was in my reality. And
Mhm,
when I saw it, I just took it as like confirmation, like, okay, that thing I'm thinking about, like, follow that.
mhm.
But no, I mean, I've had a thin veil, I guess you could say.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so
Some of us live with a thin veil in life. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So I'm just kind of now starting to learn a few things around the gifts that I have, but it's not been something that I've really explored in depth. So these
Hmm.
conversations that I'm having, though, are really expanding my awareness.
Good, good.
So yeah. uh, Now I know there was a part of your story, I believe you mentioned Jesus. I would
Hmm.
love for you to talk about your experience around Jesus.
Sure. That was the time where I felt like I was going to leave forever, because I remember my guide, the male one, taking taking me into this room. And since having that experience, I've come to realize that a lot of people, when they're walking into the light, they're in a room. And I don't know why it's always a room. Like it's not a field, it's not an open area, but it's in a room. So I think that's interesting. But anyway, I was in a room and my guide told me to hold out my left hand, um, telepathically. And I did it. And at the time that I did, there were some things going on, and everything kind of just came to a silence, like the whole universe kind of silenced. And when I stuck out my hand, a silver sphere appeared in my hand. And then I saw an image of Jesus around it in a light body form, and was telling me, you know, that everything was going to be okay, and that, you know, I'm loved, and, you know, several other things like that, and kind of counseling me. And as that was happening, a light, um, what panned around the room, forming a tunnel that was very kind of like if you're walking to a tunnel on a foggy day, except it was super bright, like brighter than the sun. And but I didn't walk into it. I was just observing that happening. And then after the tunnel formed, and it was kind of weird because I was very detached and oblivious, kind of like a toddler, was just kind of like, oh, okay, like, yeah, you're literally about to die if you cross over into that light, but okay, whatever, you know. But so after that happened, um, I was told it's not my time, and because I'd kind of surrendered at that time, where I didn't really have a preference for an outcome. Even though my daughter was, or the spirit that looked like my daughter was keeping me anchored, I didn't have a preference. And so then I was told that it wasn't my time, and that I was gonna, come back to life or what have you, and live out some things. I was shown some things I was going to go through since, once I came out of it, and everything just retracted back. And that was the last thing that I recalled in that situation. But again, everything was not linear. Like I don't know as far as time. Like I had to kind of ask questions of my family in order to figure out that particular event, when that happened in the whole course of, when I was dying.
Yeah. Wow. And so that brings me to the next question, because I know from your story there was a time where you were in, and I don't know if you were in and out of, or just in a coma for one period of time. Um, if I remember correctly, you were conscious, like there was an awareness while your body was just in this coma. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, everybody should know that, if they know somebody that's in a coma, the person goes in and out of their body. So when you're in a coma, you're never fully in your body all the time. You leave sometimes because maybe something gets uncomfortable. You're being poked or prodded or something. You need to stretch, you get directives from spiritual guides or ancestors or whatever, and you leave your body. So I was in and out of my body during that time. And, that wasn't the only time. That was the gravest time that where I was the closest to like leaving forever. But there were a couple of other times that my family told me, people were called, oh, she's going to die. So there were other times where I was, you know, had the potential to cross. And one of the times I was actually in a procedure room, and I didn't recognize my body because I was looking at it. And the doctors were talking about me, but it's like my human mental programming was not allowing me to process that the person that I was looking at was me, and that, that was, they were talking about me. So I was thinking, I kept saying, I'm over here. What are you talking about? And I was getting irritated, not realizing that that was actually me over there, you know? So,
Did you ever verify any of those things that you saw, like the doctors talking about you?
well, one of the things I verified was I remembered going into my body after being out of my body and hearing songs, particular songs that I was familiar with. And then the church that I used to belong to, they told me that they came and they a bunch of them sat by my bedside and was singing those songs and everything. So I was really floored by that. And the doctors, when I went back on my first birthday afterwards to thank, some people who had taken care of me, and they were saying, at one point, you were the sickest person in the hospital. I validated that they had to do a couple procedures on me, and they said, that I was really grim. They didn't think I was going to make it. In fact, it was kind of funny because when I went to go and talk to the nurses, I was standing up, and one of them said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize you were so short because you were lying flat the whole time." So yeah, so there were a few things that were validated.
Fascinating. So, so after, you came to and started to heal, what, what was that part like? What was that part of your journey like? I know you said
Um,
it took a while to remember some things, but like, how was that healing process for you? You mentioned the bone broth and the
mhm.
whole healing really fast. What else was there?
Yeah, well, I remembered things actually right away. And what was the problem was is that it was so like fantastical. It was so like out there, otherworldly, that it was more my mind was having a hard time processing it. So I remembered all of these things, but it was like that, even though I knew it happened, I was like, this just doesn't make sense. Like, how could this, you know what I'm saying? And I kept on asking. I would pray and I would be asking, why am I remembering this so clearly? I don't even remember, what happened XYZ yesterday. Why am I remembering this so clearly? Is there something else that I'm supposed to understand here? And that's a part of the life review that people go through when they're having a near-death experience. If you come back, there's usually something that, you have to go through a journey of more transformation afterwards, which is what I was starting. But I didn't understand that at that time because I didn't really have anybody to talk to that understood, what I went through. And I didn't know anything about the near death experience community. I'd never seen anybody have a near death experience. And so, the right afterwards, it was actually pretty lonely, and it was very hard, even though I had some healing. I had more healing to do because, mentally, I was trying to process things. I was trying to reconnect with my daughter because she was so traumatized, by the situation. And I was traumatized. I had a little PTSD. And honestly, I didn't like the world. I was just kind of like, when I was on the other side, I was like, wow, I mean, that felt more real to me than this life. And I felt like everybody was nonsense.
Yeah, I have heard
So,
that that's common for those who've had a near-death experience, that coming back, sometimes even just the journey back into the body and
hmm
having, this dense reality compared to these memories
hmm
that feel like so real, like clearer
right,
than other memories,
right.
just like you said. So yeah, I imagine that that would be difficult. I'm really
Yeah.
curious. You had mentioned that the guides, or just that you were given information about your journey when you came back, like what would happen. I'm curious if you got any other insights as to um, this world here, this time space reality that we're in.
Yeah. Well, I think in the podcast that you saw me I the one of them I had recorded on April 2nd or 3rd, I think.
Mhm.
And before then, I had kept on getting that from 5 years before. I kept on getting there was going to be a mass contact event in 5 years. So each year went by, and most of that was through the pandemic. And it came to this past year and I got it 1 year. And then by the end of the year. So by the time I did that podcast, I had mentioned that there was going to be disclosure and in regards to UFOs, and that there was going to be, and at that time I said I felt it was about disclosure, but I wasn't completely sure. But I said also that there's going to be a mass contact event by or before the end of the year. And then by the end of April, there was disclosure. And and then, since then, there have been several, like a little bit more prominent um, contact events with individuals, which I feel we're going to have a mass one. That's something that's kind of like, Rihanna at the Super Bowl type of event.
Right.
That
Huge.
have
A big
right,
deal.
right,
You can't
yeah,
miss it.
right, yeah. Um, I'm feeling something that, and this is after the fact, because I continue to get things. Something big is gonna happen around in December, around Christmas time, maybe a little bit before, but something big is gonna happen then. I also got before that we were going to have some type of a cell phone outage. So I feel like that's going to be coming, and we're going to have a bit of grid issue. And that was one of the things that I actually saw in the Akashic records. And at that time, when I was in the Akashic records with that, I was actually in California, like not actually in California, but in the Akashic records, it was in California when it happened. So when I went to California recently, I was like, oh man, is it gonna happen? It didn't happen then, but some other things happened, where I had a dream about an earthquake, and then we had an earthquake, and the came to realize that there are some things that actually this week there may be something that happens as far as geologically that is a trigger to other events. And within October is going to be uh, October 3rd, I'm sorry, was when I got that October was going to be an intense month of certain things happening. So there's going to be more to come here in October that happens. And all I can say is that people should not be afraid necessarily, but should be just mentally, emotionally prepared, because it's going to be a lot of bombardment with world activity. And then, we just started a war just started, another one a couple of days ago, but this isn't it. And I had mentioned before, I think back in late September or August, that I felt a small conflict coming. I don't know if this war that just started in Israel is the conflict that I felt, but I do feel that there's a high probability of a bigger war that's coming within the next 14 months.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm not sure when this will post, probably next week, but it's October 9th for any of the listeners. We're recording this on October 9th. Yeah. Do you have anything else that you would like to share about your experience, about information that you've got, just anything you'd like to share at all?
Just basically that everybody now is really the time to have a meditation practice and to really go within yourself. And a lot of people hear bad news and they're like, oh man, and they just start feeling like giving up right there. Now is not the time to give up. some things just happen because it's a part of the journey, but we just have to focus on ourselves. And, you're going to be okay. Excuse me. You're going to be okay regardless, because, your soul journey is not just about this life. It's about, it's across dimensions, it's across time. You're extremely powerful. You're amazing. You're a frequency of light and an extension of God. And if there's any time to believe that and to carry that with you, it's right now. And that will help to get through a lot of these crazy things that are happening. And then the other thing I just want to say is just to keep open, for people to keep open-minded, because when you have an open mind, it's easier to pour things in that fill you up, um, instead of closing yourself off. That doesn't do any good. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much for that. When you were talking about not being afraid, it reminds me of something I learned that I now teach, is that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when you go to clean out a closet, you want
Mm-hmm.
to organize your closet. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
just get clean. You got to pull everything out and you have
Mm-hmm.
a huge mess before it gets perfect. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
you for that. I have three questions that I ask
Sure.
all my guests. The first question is, how would you define God?
Whoa, that's a really good question. Um, I'm sure it's cliche. Lots of people say God is love, you know, but I would say God is on the spectrum. And what I mean by that is God is here and expresses himself through you, and expresses himself through me, or herself, or itself. And that whole thing is the entire spectrum of light and colors, that even colors that we can't even see. And and it's a part of us. So that's what God is that um, God is a part of us, basically.
Thank you. The second question is, what would you say is the purpose of life?
The purpose of life is to actually, one of my guides told me this, was for us to have our souls refined and go through the experiences that we chose to go through before coming here, that we don't remember, that we're probably kicking ourselves for right now to go through, so that we can get the refinement that we need in order to elevate and get to more mature souls until, we explode like that star, or we live and die like that star, and go into creating other things.
The final question is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer that piece of wisdom to a younger version of yourself, what would that piece of wisdom be?
Mm, let's see. To a younger version of myself, I would say, don't be afraid, and be brave, because lots of things don't happen because of self-repression, and a lot of growth gets hindered because of fear and lack of bravery.
Thank you so much for being here. Your story and all the pieces of it are just so fascinating. And I'm just so grateful that you are now actually talking about it and not holding it
Thanks.
into yourself and analyzing it, and sharing your wisdom and your heart and your experiences with the world. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure and such an honor.
Thanks, Christina.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.